The Kia EV6 and Hyundai Ioniq 5 come with several regenerative brake settings. In this video, I'll test out 3 of them: iPedal, Auto, and Zero Regen, separately on both highways and surface streets to find out which delivers the most miles per kilowatt hour. The results are not what you think. You'll be surprised. I recently bought a Kia EV6 and have been wondering about which regenerative braking setting would deliver the most miles per kilowatt hour. There are multiple settings: 0, 1, 2, 3, iPedal, the max regen setting, and an auto setting. Conventional wisdom has it that iPedal, which delivers the maximum regenerative braking power to recharge the battery, would be the most efficient. That might make sense on city streets where there is a lot of slowing and braking. But how about on a highway, where there's not much braking? Does Zero Regen, which allows for coasting, deliver better mileage on a highway? I found this to be true in my plug-in hybrid Volvo XC60, which has a normal D gear and a regen braking B gear. I found that if I use the regen brake gear on city streets and the regular drive gear on the highway, that resulted in the best gas mileage. But will that hold true for a pure electric car also? And what about this auto regen setting? How does that work and how efficient is that? With all these questions on my mind, I decided to conduct a test and get some answers. What I'm driving is an extended range EV6 all-wheel drive GT line trim. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 shares the same drivetrain as the EV6, so if you have an all-wheel drive, expect similar results, although the efficiency might be slightly less since the Ioniq 5 is not as aerodynamic. For this test, I picked 2 cities on the San Francisco Peninsula and traveled between them in back-and-forth trips. There was a route for a highway run and one for a city streets run. I repeated these trips in maximum regen or iPedal mode, in zero regen mode, and in auto mode. So there were a total of 6 back-and-forth trips that I did, 3 on the freeway and 3 on city streets. The route on the freeway consisted of starting in a park, driving down the 101 to a turnaround point, and returning on the same freeway to my start point. The round-trip highway loop was about 17 miles, and I kept to the speed limit, which varied between 55 and 65 miles an hour. The surface streets loop consisted of driving down and back on El Camino Real, a busy multi-lane road with many traffic lights, cars, and buses. The round trip for this was about 16 miles, and I kept to the speed limit, which was 35 miles an hour. Both these routes are pretty flat, and all other variables such as climate control, use of accessories, etc. remained constant. I'll show you the freeway test first and start with the iPedal mode. Now, in my opinion, this should be a pretty inefficient mode on the freeway because there is not much braking involved. So with iPedal, the car definitely feels really heavy. The throttle response is dampened. As soon as I take my foot off the accelerator, it immediately begins to slow down. And it definitely feels a much heavier, much slower mode. When I returned back to my start point, the mileage showed as 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. Next, I'll show you how Zero Regen performed. In my mind, this should be the most efficient on the highway because it takes advantage of coasting. Okay, so level 0 regen is really fun. The throttle response is really rapid. The car responds really quickly. The car feels incredibly light. And sometimes I feel like I barely have to use the accelerator because the car will just coast by itself. The drag coefficient of this car is 0.288, which is good, but there are other cars that have better drag coefficients. But despite that, you can really feel the coasting on this mode. You can just tap the accelerator just a little bit and it'll coast and it'll just keep going. Really fun mode to be driving in. Well, when I got back to my start point, to my surprise, the efficiency was 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. Well within a margin of error compared to the iPedal's 3.7 to call it essentially the same, but not significantly higher as I had expected. So coasting doesn't really seem to deliver any advantage. Next, I'll show you how the auto setting performed. In its manual, Kia describes auto mode as a smart regeneration system that automatically controls the regenerative braking depending on the road gradient and distance or speed of the vehicle ahead. Presumably, there's a computer that's constantly monitoring these variables and adjusting the regen settings to maximize the efficiency. So auto mode feels a lot like a level 3 regen mode. Basically, the car feels kind of heavy. If I take the foot off the accelerator, it immediately begins to slow down. And so the performance just feels like it's a level 3 regen. Well, when I got back to my start point, interestingly, the efficiency was 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour, just like the iPedal and zero regen modes. Frankly, having all these three modes deliver the same result was quite surprising to me, as I would have expected a difference. But the results on the city streets test were definitely not all the same. Just like the highway, I'll show you the iPedal first. Now in theory, this should be the most efficient mode because there is a lot of slowing and braking on city streets, giving lots of opportunities for charging of the battery through regenerative braking. iPedal is a really nice mode for city driving, for surface streets. You can just essentially control the car with one pedal, accelerate when you need to go, and take your foot off, and the car will automatically slow down and come to a complete stop. So that's really great on city streets. The pedal response is a little muted. So starting off from a stop sign or a light, you may find it a little heavy, but when it's city streets, that's perfectly okay. So one thing I have noticed in iPedal mode is that the car is using both motors, the front and the rear motor, which is interesting because I'm certainly not flooring it, I'm not going fast, not asking for power from the car, but it is still using both motors to produce power and for regeneration. When I got back to my start point, the mileage was 4.3 miles per kilowatt hour, a pretty impressive number on its own. Next, I'll show you the zero regen setting. So, zero regen feels really light, really responsive, coasts a lot. I don't have to use the gas pedal or the accelerator pedal too much, but I do have to use the brake pedal a lot. It has zero regeneration, so essentially when I need to come to a stop, I'm using the friction brakes constantly. Now, I'm not expecting much out of this mode because zero regen didn't give any opportunities for charging of the battery. And sure enough, the mileage was a disappointing 3.9. Lastly, I'll show you the auto setting. Yes, this was a very painful test to do. Now, auto on city streets poses an interesting challenge. It puts to the test the ability of the car's algorithm to constantly manage the regeneration based on speed and distance of the vehicle in front. Gradient didn't matter here because the route was flat. Will it be able to beat the frontrunner, the iPedal mode? Well, it returned an impressive 4.6 miles per kilowatt hour, beating out the iPedal mode. So let's put all these numbers side by side and see what we can learn from them. First, on the highway, surprisingly, it doesn't seem to matter which setting you are in. They all delivered essentially the same result. Next, when comparing the highway and street numbers, it's remarkable to see how much more efficient the car is on surface streets in auto and iPedal modes. In auto, driving on surface streets is 24% more efficient, and in iPedal mode, 16% more efficient. But it takes twice as long, so you'll have to be patient if you want that efficiency. But by far, the biggest surprise of this analysis has been the performance of the auto mode. It delivered the best mileage on surface streets and remained on par with the other modes for the highway mileage. On streets, it delivered a 7% better number than iPedal. One of the factors that probably helped it was Kia's clever system, where a clutch deactivates the front motor when not needed. Since iPedal uses both motors all the time, that results in a lesser mileage number. The auto setting, by turning off the front motor when not needed, has an advantage. And then whatever algorithm that Kia is using for the auto setting to take into account gradient, traffic, and speed is clearly sophisticated and delivering impressive results. As an aside, I'd be curious to see how these results differ in a rear-wheel drive configuration. But while auto mode wins on a numbers basis, it's not just about numbers. It's also about how the car drives. If you're coming from an automatic transmission, gas-powered car, the auto mode feels very similar to that in its driving characteristics. So that may be a comfortable setting for you if you're new to EVs and if the iPedal feels strange to you. But for me, I still prefer iPedal on city streets because of the convenience of just keeping my foot on the accelerator pedal and not having to do the constant footwork back and forth to the brake pedal. And on the highway, I really enjoy the lightness and quick response of the zero regen setting. That makes the car fun to drive. So despite auto being the most efficient, I still may stick to how I've been driving this car. For now, I think. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of these results and which is your favorite regen setting. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and please be sure to check out my other Kia EV6 videos. Please subscribe and consider supporting me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Please give the video a like, share your comments below, and subscribe to the Driver Download.